The lights in the sparring hall buzzed too loud, and every cadet in the room had gone completely still, because Instructor Varel had just grabbed my chin with one clawed hand and lifted my face toward his, and nobody in 6 months had ever seen him touch a cadet like that. His 4 black eyes were inches from mine. His breath smelled like ozone and old metal. Around us, 40 cadets from a dozen different worlds stood frozen at the edge of the mat, and I could feel every one of their stares pressing into my back like small stones. "Say something," Varel said, his gravel voice low enough that only the front row could hear it. "Anything. Give me a reason to remember you." I didn't move. I didn't blink. I was doing math instead, the kind of math that doesn't show on a person's face. His reach was long, 4 arms instead of 2. But Threxians evolved under lighter gravity than the Academy used, and I had watched him for 6 months without him noticing. He always led with his upper right arm, always. It was a habit built into him before he ever set foot off his home world, and habits like that do not disappear just because a person becomes an instructor. He released my chin and stepped back, circling me the way he circled every cadet he wanted to break in front of an audience. This was his stage. He liked an audience. "Oh, say," he said, loud enough now for the whole hall to hear. "Do you know what I see when I look at you?" I said nothing. Somewhere behind me, I heard a cadet named Grace Turner shift her weight, the small sound of boots on the mat, nervous on my behalf. "I see a soft world," Varel continued. "I see comfortable air and comfortable gravity, and a species that got lucky enough to evolve without a single real predator worth mentioning. I see children who call a scraped knee a tragedy." He tilted his head, and the plates along his jaw clicked together, a sound Threxians made when they were satisfied with themselves. "I have killed things with more instinct in a single limb than your whole species carries combined." A cadet near the back let out a short breath, almost a laugh, quickly swallowed. Varel liked that too. He fed off it. 6 months. 6 months of watching him do this, to nearly every human cadet in the program, one at a time, always in front of everyone, always with that same script about soft worlds and comfortable air. I had watched him break a boy named Ethan Cole down to tears in front of 30 people during our 2nd week, and I had told myself, back then, that my turn would come eventually, and that when it did, I would decide how it went. My turn had come. "Combat stance," Varel ordered. "Now, let's see what a garden world taught you." I stepped into position. It was not the stance the Academy manual taught. It was older than any manual, older than the Coalition itself, and it came from a place that never made it onto any survey chart with a name attached, only a number and a warning label, because the drones that mapped it had flown low once and never flown low again. Varel's eyes narrowed slightly. He noticed the difference in my stance, but he did not understand it, and that gap between noticing and understanding was the only opening I would ever need. "Interesting," he said, almost to himself. "Where did you learn that?" "Home," I said. It was the first word I had spoken since he grabbed me. He smiled, if you could call the way his mouth plates spread apart a smile. "Earth doesn't teach children to stand like that." "I'm not from Earth," I said. "Not originally." That caught something in his eyes, a flicker of curiosity he did not expect to feel, but he covered it fast, folding it back under his usual sneer. "Then enlighten me, Deathworld girl. Where does a soft species learn a stance like that?" The room went quiet again, quieter than before, because everyone could feel that something had shifted, even if they couldn't name what. "My family lived 3 generations on a world the Coalition survey drones flagged and abandoned," I said. "No name. Just a number and a warning. 16-hour gravity storms that could crack stone. Predators that hunted in packs smart enough to flank a full-grown adult. No medicine drops, no rescue ships, just people, trying to make it to the next storm alive." Varel's jaw plates stopped clicking. "We didn't call it a death world," I continued. "We just called it home, because it was the only one we had, and because calling it anything else wouldn't have kept anyone alive one day longer." For a moment, just a moment, something crossed his face that looked almost like doubt. Then his pride caught up with him, the way pride always does with people who have built their whole identity on being the most dangerous thing in any room. "A sad story," he said. "Doesn't make you a warrior. Show me. Attack." I stayed still. "I said attack," he repeated, sharper now, stepping closer, one clawed hand rising in a gesture that was meant to look like an invitation, but was really meant to look like a threat. The same gesture he had used on every human cadet before me, the one that made most of them flinch and swing wild and lose before the exchange even started. I did not flinch. Instead, I watched his upper right arm begin its familiar lift, the same lead he always used, the same habit he had carried with him since before this academy existed, and I let my body do what 6 years of gravity storms and pack hunters had carved into it long before I ever learned how to properly read. I moved under the reach instead of away from it. That was the part nobody expected, because every instinct in the room told a person to back away from 4 arms and 2 meters of armored muscle, and backing away was exactly what he was built to punish. Moving in close, underneath the strike, was the only place his advantage disappeared. My shoulder met the inside of his elbow joint, the one place his species never bothered to reinforce because on his home world nothing ever attacked from below. I used his own forward momentum, redirected it downward and sideways, the same way my father once redirected a hunting pack leader twice his size during a storm that had already taken half our shelter roof. Varel's balance broke before his brain caught up with what was happening. He went down hard, the mat absorbing the impact with a heavy thud that echoed through the silent hall. Before he could plant a single hand to push himself back up, I had already dropped to one knee beside him, my forearm resting firm and controlled against the base of his neck plate, not pressing hard enough to hurt him, just hard enough that every cadet in that room understood exactly what position he was in. 3 seconds, maybe 4. Nobody breathed. Varel's 4 eyes stared up at me, wide in a way I had never seen on him before, because for the first time since I arrived at this academy, he was the one being looked down on. "You said you killed things with more instinct than my whole species," I said quietly, only for him to hear. "But instinct isn't about being the strongest thing in the room. It's about knowing exactly where the weak point is, and not hesitating when you find it." I eased the pressure and stood, offering him a hand he did not take. The hall stayed silent for a long moment. Then, from somewhere near the back, a single cadet started clapping, slow and uncertain at first, like they weren't sure if it was allowed. Then another joined, then another. Varel pushed himself up off the mat, brushing dust from his plated arms, his expression unreadable, somewhere between anger and something that looked almost like respect, trying to find room to exist for the first time. "Class dismissed," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Nobody moved right away. They were all still watching me, like they were trying to decide whether what they just saw was real. Grace Turner found me first, catching up as I walked toward the locker corridor, her eyes wide with something between shock and admiration. "Where did you learn that? Really learn it, I mean. Not the sad story version. The real one." "That was the real one," I told her. She studied my face for a moment, like she was trying to read whether I was joking. I wasn't. "You've never talked about home before," she said. "Not once. 6 months. And I didn't even know you were from a Deathworld." "Nobody asks," I said. "Everyone assumes humans are from Earth, and that Earth means comfortable, and comfortable means soft." It was easier to let them assume. Why? I thought about that question for a long moment before answering. Because the moment people learn where you're really from, they stop seeing you and start seeing a story. I didn't want to be a story. I wanted to be a cadet like everyone else. Grace fell into step beside me, quiet for a few seconds. "Well, you're not just a cadet anymore, not after that." She wasn't wrong. By the time we reached the dormitory wing, word had already spread. Cadets from other squads leaned out of doorways to get a look at me, whispering to each other in 6 different languages, and I caught fragments of the story already changing shape as it passed from mouth to mouth, growing taller and stranger with every retelling, the way stories always do. That evening, I sat alone near the observation deck, looking out at the stars scattered across the black beyond the Academy's rotating hull. It was the only place on the station quiet enough to think, and I needed to think, because facing Varel had pulled something loose inside me that I had kept sealed shut for a long time. I thought about my father, who taught me the stance I used that day, who used to say that surviving a Deathworld was not about being the strongest creature on it, but about paying closer attention than anything else that wanted you dead. I thought about my mother, who kept the shelter running through storms that lasted longer than most people's patience, who never once let fear slow her hands. I thought about the little brother I used to shield during the worst of the pack hunts, who grew up fast because our world never allowed anyone the luxury of growing up slow. None of that had ever made it into my academy file. On paper, I was just another human cadet from New Kessa Station, an ordinary transfer with an ordinary record. The truth had always been bigger than the paperwork allowed, and until today, I had let it stay that way. A voice behind me broke the quiet. "Mind if I sit?" I turned to find Noah Bennett, a cadet from my tactics class, standing a respectful distance away. He was one of the few people at the academy who had never laughed along when Varel humiliated someone. I nodded, and he lowered himself onto the bench beside me, careful to leave space between us. That was something else today, he said after a moment. I've never seen anyone put him on the ground like that. Not once, in 3 years I've been here. He wasn't ready for it, I said. That's the only reason it worked. I don't think that's the only reason, Noah said. I think you've been holding something back this whole time, and today you finally let it out. I didn't answer right away. The stars outside the viewport blinked steady and cold, the same way they had blinked over my childhood shelter on nights when the storms finally broke and the sky cleared long enough to see them. My whole life, I said eventually, I was taught that surviving quietly is better than surviving loudly. Draw less attention, and fewer things come looking for you. I carried that lesson here, even though nothing on this station is actually trying to kill me. Old habits don't know the difference between real danger and old danger. Noah considered that for a moment. Maybe it's time to let some of those old habits rest. I almost smiled. Maybe. The next morning, the sparring hall felt different before I even stepped through the door. Cadets who used to avoid eye contact with me now offered small nods as I passed. Even the instructors from other divisions seemed to watch me a little longer than usual, like they were trying to recalculate something about who I was. Varel was already on the mat when I arrived, standing with his arms folded, watching the new group of cadets file in for the morning session. When his eyes found mine, he didn't sneer the way he usually did. He simply studied me, the way a person studies something they used to think they understood completely, and now realize they never understood at all. "Osei," he said, his voice steady, no mockery in it this time. "A word, before class begins." I stepped forward, half expecting some kind of punishment, some official complaint about yesterday's spar, some attempt to reclaim the ground he lost in front of the entire hall. Instead, he simply looked at me for a long moment before speaking. "I have taught at this academy for 11 years, he said. "I have broken down cadets from 30 different worlds, and I told myself it was discipline, that it was necessary, that fear was the fastest way to prepare someone for a battlefield that does not care about their comfort." He paused, his jaw plates shifting slowly. "Yesterday, you proved something to me that I did not want to learn. Fear was never the lesson. Attention was. You did not defeat me because you were angry, or because you wanted revenge for every cadet I ever humiliated. You defeated me because you were paying closer attention to me than I was paying to you, in a room where I believed I already understood every threat present." I said nothing, waiting to see where this was going. "I owe you an apology," he continued, and I could hear how much it cost him to say it, each word dragged out like it weighed more than it should. Not just for yesterday, for every soft world joke, every garden world sneer, every assumption I built about your species before I ever bothered to ask a single one of you where you truly came from. Around us, the new cadets had gone quiet, sensing that something important was happening even if they didn't fully understand what. "I accept that," I said, "but I want you to understand something too. Not every human comes from where I come from. Some of them really did grow up comfortable, and that doesn't make them weak either. Comfort doesn't erase courage. It just means their courage hasn't been tested the same way mine was." Varel nodded slowly, like he was turning that thought over carefully before setting it down somewhere permanent. A fair point, one I clearly needed to hear. He turned toward the new cadets, straightening his posture, the old authority returning to his voice, but something in his tone had shifted, something quieter and more careful than before. "Combat stance," he told them. "Show me what your worlds taught you, all of you. I am listening this time, not assuming." I watched the new cadets step forward, nervous but no longer terrified, and I realized the tone of the entire hall had changed overnight. Whatever fear used to live in that room, the fear that had made cadets flinch before a single hand was ever raised, had been replaced with something steadier, not comfort, just honesty. Grace Turner caught my eye from across the mat and gave me a small, knowing smile. Noah Bennett offered a short nod from his place near the wall. I returned both gestures and found a spot at the edge of the group, ready to begin the day's training like any other cadet, except that everyone in that hall now understood something about me that I had spent 6 months trying to keep hidden. I was not soft. I had never been soft. I came from a place that never gave anyone the option of being soft, and I carried that place with me into every room I walked into, whether people could see it or not. Varel still pushed us hard that day, harder than usual in some ways, but the sneer never returned, and neither did the script about garden worlds and comfortable air. Somewhere along the way, in the space of a single 3-second exchange on a training mat, something between us had changed permanently, and it rippled outward into every cadet who had witnessed it. By the end of the week, new cadets arriving at the academy heard a different story about Instructor Varel than the one my class had heard 6 months earlier. They heard about a girl from a world with no name, who had ended his arrogance in seconds without raising her voice, without losing her composure, and without ever needing to prove anything beyond what her instincts already knew to be true. I never asked to become that story. I only ever wanted to survive one more day, the same way I had been taught since before I could properly read. But sometimes surviving loudly, just once, changes more than surviving quietly ever could. And somewhere out past the Academy's rotating hull, past the stars blinking steady and cold in the black, I like to think my father would have been proud of how I finally let that old lesson speak for itself.